Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Liz Myska. And today I have my summer intern 2023 from the medical school, whom I will let introduce herself.
Yeah, I am a now second year, officially according to my schedule, a second year medical student at UMass in Worcester.
And your name is?
Oh, right, I'm Victoria. Yes, my name is Victoria. And
Vicky for short.
Yes, Vicky for short. Yeah.
And why did you, tell me about the internship, even though, I was one of the co-creators of it. Yeah. And why it intrigued you. I guess for a little bit of background, I should say I'm one of the, you are interning with me, a lawyer, and you're interning with Dr. Mike Marciello, who is a physician, a physiatrist.
I think I'm always interested in the ways that we can build new narratives. And I think that comes across especially when you're in interdisciplinary fields. So I thought it was really interesting that you, a lawyer, and Dr. Mike, a physiatrist, were working together to kind of explore different ideas of what disability and impairment mean, since it is constructed a little differently in each world and has different implications for a person's life, but they do interact as well. And also, I had worked with an adaptive climbing group in Boston for a little bit before coming to Worcester and starting medical school. And so I was really excited to work again with a community organization that was led by people who have visual impairments and were organizing events for people with visual impairments. I really like events that are kind of organized by community for a community.
I agree.
Yeah. So.
Because I think so often it's the top-down, bottom-up approach that, well-intended, trained individuals, professionals, say, oh, I've had that experience. I know what's good for this population. And they may very well be right, but then they don't, at least in my opinion, give an opportunity or give space for those who are impacted, the population, that is, to agree or disagree or say, hey, we can tinker with this and make this better.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm again. So you're almost to the end of the internship, and what insights have you have you had?
The world is much less accessible than I hoped.
Amen to that.
Yes.
Could you give us an example, Vicky, because again, I know you've been shadowing Dr. Mike in his office, and you've been you've been traipsing around with me as well. Can you give us some some examples of that?
Well, one thing that I learned from you early on there are these things called truncated domes, and so they're little bumpy, typically, hopefully yellow, although I've noticed not always yellow.
There you go.
They should be rectangles, again, not always rectangles, depending on upkeep, at the corner of a sidewalk, specifically usually at the curb cuts where the sidewalk kind of comes down a little to allow wheelchair users to access the street. And they have bumps on them in a pattern that allows people with visual impairments to kind of line up to the crossing. And they should be lined up in a way where you can line up with your back in the direction of the grid and know that you are going to cross the street, ostensibly.
Right. A perpendicular.
Right.
So the truncated dome being perpendicular to the crosswalk, so that when you step off the truncated dome, theoretically, you are in the crosswalk. And safely in that crosswalk zone.
Yes. And so I think one thing I've started saying a lot this summer is, oh no, it's apexed, which means that because of the way that curb cuts are often cut in a sidewalk, I think to optimize the space constraints, They make it exactly at the corner, which means that, yes, technically you can exit the curb and go onto either crosswalk, but it also means that, I don't know why they do this, but they put the apex dome also at the very end of the curb cut, and so it's situated 45 degrees to the rest of the crosswalk. Yes, 45 degrees. I don't want to embarrass my alma mater.
I was going to say, MIT grad.
Yes. It's been a while since I've done that. But the unfortunate part is that this means that if you line up to it the way that, I think people are trained to line up to it,
yeah.
You're not going to cross in the crosswalk. You're going to cross into the traffic or into the street, which is really dangerous. And to this day, I still don't quite understand how someone is supposed to know that unless they've had kind of the chance to get to know their neighborhood and they know, like, oh, these different domes, like this crosswalk is so-and-so and this other crosswalk is another way. And it really makes, I think, traversing public life, in my opinion, really dangerous.
And the environment becomes very hostile, even though it wouldn't appear to be hostile, because people unknowingly would be saying, well, there are truncated domes here. Like, what's your problem? Mm-hmm. Everything should be fine. But I think the missing element is if you can't see it and you've just been trained to go by feel or touch, meaning the truncated dome under your feet or under your cane if you're a cane user, you could very easily stray into harm's way, and then be jarred and jolted and potentially injured,
right?
Because of a presumption that this is obvious and it's not. And to your point, I was always intrigued, I was always stymied, like, why don't I see more blind people walking around? When I became visually impaired, I thought, now I'm going to be noticing blind people because but again, in my observation, I did not see blind people. And when I did see blind people walking on a sidewalk, they were walking either very confidently and quickly, because it appeared that they knew their environment, and that was deliberate because they had been trained in that environment, or they were newly visually impaired, and you could just tell by their body language and the way that they appeared or presented themselves. They were terrified. They were like slinking along the building, like groping, and that also sends signals to other human beings that, whoa, this person's an easy mark. They're out of their normal element,
right?
And that's what got me interested in the self-defense, because it was kind of like, I want to go out. I want to walk confidently in the world, but is my behavior in the world as a visually impaired person a telltale sign to somebody who has bad intent that I'm an easy mark? And so now am I going to censor myself and alter my behavior? And so that's, again, I'm a keen observer to the extent that I can, visually observe of human behavior and what makes people do things and why people don't do things. And again, I feel like I'm wresting this conversation from you, but that's what really intrigued me. I wanted to be physically active, but I also wanted to understand what that meant to me as a visually impaired person, but what that meant to the world, because oftentimes I've had the experience, again, usually earlier in my stint as a VIP, as a visually impaired person, where I was told at a hiking event, oh no, you can't, not you, no, you can't do this, and I was flabbergasted again by the protective nature, but also like the dismissiveness of you couldn't possibly have these capabilities or these aptitudes. And me being me, it's kind of like, oh yeah, oh yeah, I'll show you, and not then there and then, but it's like I don't want to be told what I can do and what I can't do. And I think that again harkens back to me being a lawyer and having choice. And that's what I tell my clients. I'm an options counselor as a lawyer. I am going to going to research, and I'm going to say, I'm going to identify the options. You, my client, get to pick, with my advice and my tutelage, which option is best for you, because with each option comes pros and cons. But ultimately, you get to choose, and if you choose none of the above, you've chosen. Even though you don't think you've chosen. And I think that often gets lost, and that's what I feel with the blindness community, that because I've identified as a blind person and I'm identifying as a blind person, things are being chosen for me, and that chafes that chafes me, and I'm like, no, I don't want to be pushed towards the blind stuff. I want to adapt the sighted stuff, and then I get to choose: am I going to tarry with in the blind world, or am I going to tarry in the sighted world, or can we create something where the communities and the populations intermix and commingle and learn from one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think even just taking it to what we were discussing with like adaptations for competitive swimming, and how there are people who will tap the swimmer on the head as they approach the end of the lane so the swimmer knows how to swim, right? Like, you could say, without that, is competitive swimming okay for a blind person to do? Will they get injured? And then in that case, like, what does it mean to, like, what would the blind thing be for swimming versus the visually, like, the sighted world? And I think that's one of the areas where I think the idea of accessibility and adaptation brings a lot of meaning as well, because I think you're right. There's a lot of empowerment in deciding, like, I do want to participate in this activity, and it's not that I can't, it's just that none of us have been creative enough to sit down and think, how can we make this activity accessible to me?
Right.
And I think that's actually one of the reasons why I do enjoy working in the disability world a lot, is that I think it forces us to be more creative with how we approach solutions to things. Because ironically, I think by accepting some of the constraints that are placed on our activities, whether it's, different ways that people's minds work, or like different sensory abilities, etc., I think it forces us to sit down and look at a system and think, well, okay, like, this is a system that was designed, and we just kind of carried on with it, and we said, like, these are the things that were, and they will continue to be. And I think sometimes accepting that there are a lot of people out there whose needs were not considered in the original design process, it forces you to sit down and think, like, well, is the system really working well for people? And then I think you can say, like, well, how can we design it to be more accessible? And I personally feel that when you design for accessibility, you actually make it better for all users.
You do.
So,
you do.
Yeah.
I was, I that I'm on the Architectural Access Board for the state, and yesterday we had a petitioner who owned an arcade, a bar and an arcade in Salem, and he wants to have a karaoke room. So he has 2-level facility that he rents. He wanted to have a karaoke room on the first level and the second level. The first level has accessible restrooms. The second level did not. And there's no vertical access for anybody on wheels. So he came before the Architectural Access Board asking for a variance so that he would not have to install any kind of lift or device, because his argument was, we can get the same experience on the first level, so somebody on wheels could get the same experience on the first level that they could on the second level. But we on the board were trying to impress upon him, well, not everybody has physical mobility challenges. So somebody may be able to ambulate stairs, but they would still need an accessible restroom up in the second level. And when it was my turn to speak, I said, I'm just interested in the karaoke thing. I said, because I'm visually impaired. And I said, so karaoke is visual, right? He says, yeah, the words appear on the screen. I'm like, so I said, I can perambulate stairs, so I could go to either the second floor or the first floor. I said, but why would I come to your establishment? Because there's nothing for me. And he's like, oh, he said, what about Braille? And I said, well, and that gave me the opportunity to talk about Braille. And it's like, not everybody that's blind knows Braille or will know Braille. Mm-hmm. So again, even though you've thought about accessibility, you've thought about accessibility from a physical standpoint, not a sensory standpoint, right, not a cognitive standpoint. And I just wanted to impress that upon him. And again, he's like, I never thought about this. And so in hearing you, Vicky, talk about your experience in the internship, and you and others, and myself included, I was like, I never thought of it like that. That was never either pointed out to me, or I never noticed it, or it wasn't obvious. And I think that's why intermixing and commingling different populations becomes so vital, because of course you're not going to know these things. They're not necessarily going to be taught to you. Mm-hmm. And it is learned behavior. And I think was the revelation to me. Like, when I started losing my sight, like, I don't know anything about this. I'm a foreigner in a foreign land, And the lingo, the language was all foreign to me as well. And I thought, well, how can I, as one human being, make the difference? Because I understand how difficult it is, and you were expressing this too. Things are just done a certain way, and when you try to deviate from that, you're the interloper, you're the problem. But really what you're trying to do is open it up rather than keep it closed down. Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, what really it means is just that system was never designed with multiple people's ability levels in mind.
Right.
And I think the other point you bring up that's really important, and one thing that I've learned from this internship, is that when you think about accessibility, there are a lot of different accessibility needs. Or rather, I guess, there's a lot of communities who it's important to consider and to ask for input when you design for accessibility. Because just bringing it back to the truncated dome and the curb cut, right? I personally think maybe how that came about is just that people were like, well, we have to make our sidewalks more accessible, and we do have to build in curb cuts, and we also have to put in truncated domes. So we'll do both at once, and then it'll be great for everyone. Mm-hmm. And the answer is maybe it's actually not great for either population that these devices are built for. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one thing I've learned from, listening in on the accessibility board meetings and et cetera, is just, it's really important to make sure you get a broad kind of array of inputs, because one person can't possibly speak to the entire disability community's perspectives and needs. And I think even within a certain disability, there are different ability levels and different ways that people may have reached that overall label. And so even within that, you might say, well, there's different ways of making things more accessible. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, I know that one of the members of WalkFit carries around a magnifying glass in her purse, and that allows her to read written materials better. Mm-hmm. But I don't imagine that works well for everyone who has visual impairments. Mm-hmm. But it's a really important technological tool for her. And so, you have to say you can't just say I asked one person with visual impairments. Right. And so clearly now I know what everyone with a visual impairment possibly needs in the world. And you can't say like, well, I asked one person with a disability, and so now I know what everyone in the world with disabilities might need.
Or that one, as you said earlier, there's one spokesperson for all. But again, I think that's human. That's human to want to catalog, and it makes it easier that this is the way it's done, and this is the person that carries forth this ideology. And it's not necessarily the way it is, but I guess just to grapple with it, and like you said, accessibility is going to be defined differently by different individuals about what the word accessible is. You, Vicky, were preceded several years ago, pre-COVID, by two individuals who had vision impairment, who were my interns for the summer. And one of those individuals wants to become a lawyer, and that his task for the summer was more or less define accessibility. And he was like, it's different for each person, and and I think that's the conclusion that you're coming to, like, and how different people define it is it's through their own lens. That if you can enter in and you can exit, and there's vertical access, then it's accessible. Well, for certain individuals, but not for everyone.
And unfortunately, where's the bathroom?
Yes, of course. Yes, our all-important bathroom challenge that everyone quivers. I'm thinking that we are running out of time, so I just want to ask, what's next for you? I know you mentioned second year. Where do you think where is your journey going to take you next in terms of your interest level? Have you drawn any conclusions from your first year?
Liz, this is so terrible. You put me on a spot in a recorded medium.
It is.
Well, what do I have next? I'm trying to keep my mind open.
Okay. I know you've ruled out certain things that you're like, no, I am not going to do this.
And so I will leave that to my colleagues who do enjoy surgery.
Surgery, okay, all right. That's a rule out. All right.
Well, it's fun that I don't want to do it because I have a lot of classmates who are interested.
Right.
I don't know. I think it's hard to say because the first and second years you're still mostly in the classroom, and so I can only speak to what I've had the fortune to kind of dabble in so far, and I'm really looking forward to third year for that reason because that's when we have our dedicated clinical time to rotate through.
And the clerkship will be in your third year.
Yes, it will be.
Right.
I think for now I'm just excited to take this time and learn. I mean that seems very simple and maybe like a cop-out answer, but I think it's very often that you get so much flexibility in your time to just say like, well, actually I would like to learn more about other people's experiences in the world, and I get to sit with people and hear more about their experiences or walk with them through a moment of their lives and kind of build my knowledge more, kind of like you said, I can't possibly have been exposed to everything in the world, and I never will be, but it would be great to take this time to get exposed to more people's experiences of the world and kind of think more of how each of us moves to the world. So I'm really excited for that, and I hope I can continue to do that in the next few years. So, yeah.
And I'm hoping that you will continue on with WalkFit.
I
provided
love WalkFit. Yeah.
Provided you are able to do so.
Yes. I can't, make any promises about my time availability.
I understand.
But I do love WalkFit.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Any little teasers about the poster presentation that you have? I think next week.
Oh.
I'm feeling like I'm the I'm the the educator that's saying, Vicki, did you pass your things on time? Are you meeting your deadlines?
Well, I feel like I'm...
Is it going to coalesce in time for you?
I feel like I'm being examined by a very competent attorney.
And see, I am not a trial attorney.
And yeah, here we are. I feel like perhaps my counsel should have prepared me a little bit better, by which I mean myself. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some overarching themes that are going to be on my poster, and I think we've actually discussed them. Like, what are the main takeaways from this internship? And the answer is just that accessibility means different things to different people, and that we really need to be careful when we design the world to make sure that we do actually think about, whose perspectives have been included in the design process and whose needs have been considered and who's being left out. And then, of course, making sure that people have a seat at the table to voice their concerns.
And making sure that seat doesn't have wheels on it so that they go scuttling by.
Yeah, unless it's a seat with wheels that they've brought themselves.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go.
It's their personal mobility device. Yes. That I think there's a lot to be said for how we can improve the infrastructure of the city of Worcester, as well as within our medical establishments. And this is not to throw shade on any of these organizations or groups. I think it's just been very clear through the summer that there's a lot of ways where it would be really, really hard to pass through a space without someone there with you. At least for me, I would think that it would be really hard for me to go to this place without any knowledge of what this physical layout is like and with the ways that spaces have been set up for me to then get to where I need to go. And so I think there should be some main takeaways of these are things that you can look out for in the spaces that you live, work, play, and think, oh, well, this isn't, I know now, this is something that could be improved. And maybe think, especially because hopefully I'm really hoping some of my fellow medical students and professors will look at this, and hopefully other community organizations that have been working with people through the summer, leveraging the power and the access that you now have to say, hey, I heard about these things. I just wanted to mention it and bring it to your attention, other person who has some power over this. Also, we should ask more people for input on this, because if this is one area we've missed, then maybe there are some other areas we've missed. So, yeah.
Excellent. And what a way to conclude our conversation, Vicki. I'm very appreciative. And I've enjoyed working with you this summer and throwing you into the deep end when you were mentioning swimming, throwing you into the deep end and having you have your aha moments, but then bringing that back into the into your own awareness and consciousness, and again, it's like an amoeba. This is the only scientific thing that I will talk about. The amoeba going in different directions. So
an amoeba is a single cellular organism.
Well, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Are you talking about a slime mold, perhaps?
No. Good luck in the coming year, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. And please join me again for the next edition of Connecting the Dots.
Please note that the information provided in this show is not a substitute for consulting with an experienced local attorney and receiving counsel based on the facts and circumstances of a particular transaction. To contact Lizbeth, email her at lisbeth@elizabethlmyska.com or call her office at 508-753-7681. We're online at connectingthedots.lawyer. Executive producers, Liz Myska and Jack Peacock. Producers, John Medberry and Bill Hamilton. A production of Elizabeth L. Myska, J.D., LLM, in association with Compliments.